Welcome. It's Caleb here for a special presentation of Powerful Words midweek presentation. Due to the rabbit hole, the incredibly deep Laurentian abyss rabbit hole that I've run up against, I believe it's imperative for me to jump in and begin to relay this information to you, as I am I'm certain and assured that this begins to tie all of the elements of this deep state assault together and gives us that final 40,000 foot view that we've been craving. And with the ensuing arrest, or the arrest that has occurred recently of Ghislaine Maxwell, she becomes pivotal in determining this this collage that we're finally able to make out and see a steady picture of a global entity looking to not only take down this nation, but in so doing, create the one world order. And that's their intent, that is their purpose, that is their drive. And I expect to determinedly demonstrate this evening that all parties are involved are in the same cadre. They're following the same game plan. They are seeking the same objectives, and they're speaking from the same script. And when we see that, we will see that finally all players have been identified, because they'll be identified by the script they're speaking from, and the intent of their objectives, their end result, shared among all of them, will be evidence that they are in fact from the same group that we call by many names. And I think tonight what we're going to see is that they have many names because that's part of their power and their authority, is that they've cobbled together all beings who want the same objective, even though they hate each other. They've come together under the service of self and the service of Satan and the service of power to bring about the same objective. And so let's get at it. What I'm going to show you tonight is how Ghislaine Maxwell first has easily avoided arrest for over 24 years. Not because she avoided arrest, but because she is a pivotal player in this cadre, and she has been rewarded over and over again. For example, she has spoken some 12 times at the UN over this period. So how can somebody be seeking asylum or running away from arrest when they've been invited to the UN 12 times to speak? And so just as Hillary Clinton received an award, and Dominic Atskeith both received an award from the Chatham House following the destruction of our embassy in Benghazi, they were rewarded because they were successful. They were successful at the plan. The objective was achieved, and though it's hard for us to imagine as Americans that our embassy being attacked and our ambassador being killed and 4 of our devout patriots being murdered and CIA folks being injured in the process trying to defend them. But that was the objective. The objective was to take down the embassy. And so over and over again we see in these cities where people who we believe are criminals are being let out of jail immediately because they're being rewarded because they're doing what they're told. They're being obedient, and they're being rewarded for being obedient. Now, being a man of God, I have to begin this and tell you point blank that all of this is biblical, and it matches the Bible precisely. And we just need to have some understanding of our faith to realize that the Lord is setting up this final matchup, this final paradigm, where people are forced to make a decision either for or against. And so that's what we're going to be delving into this evening. And what I want you to understand is that if you look back in history, you will see the same conclusions. You will derive the same conclusions that I have derived. But it's still free will. You get to go and do that yourself, and that's being at Patriot Soapbox. We always bring the sauce. We don't tell you what to think because you're Americans and you're patriots, and you go think for yourselves. But I hope and I believe that the information that I present is absolutely conclusive to the fact that we are being attacked by not only a continuing empire throughout the ages, but also an empire that is sponsored by the powers and dominions of the fallen, and that is why they're able to conduct operations with such cruelty, with such malice, and such lack of consideration for humanity, and that shocks us. And so we ought to be aware of that, what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an enemy that does not have any love for us and would like to see us destroyed. And that's the truth. And so it's all tied together, the pedophilia, the propaganda, the pursuit of power is all tied together in one big bundle by the information that I'm going to provide tonight. And I'll start out with the Bible. We're looking at Revelation chapter 6. In Revelation chapter 6, it says, I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Okay, so here we've got a white horse of the apocalypse, right? We've got someone going forth with a bow. We've got what is referred to as we typically refer to as the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But this first horseman is an unique character. He's got a crown on, which means that he has some capacity for royalty, that he is royalty, and that he has the ability to proclaim himself royalty and have the rights to rule. But he has an unusual circumstance. He has a bow with no arrows in his quiver. So this first horseman of the apocalypse comes out with a bow and no arrows in his quiver, but was given unto him to conquer. So when we match those two things up, it seems like a contradiction. But if we look at our current circumstance, we see that it actually is quite simple to draw the conclusions that we need to draw, because this first horseman of the apocalypse is the Roman Empire, and it is conquering the earth without war. They're using means, subterfuge, insurgency, propaganda, political movements, and they're conquering the world through that, and that's matches the Bible. So we need to be aware of that. So let's begin tonight. I'm going to share some things with you. Let me see if I can get my screen up here. And as always, I really appreciate you coming and visiting with me. And I hope to provide material that is conclusive, is replicatable, and is very clear with regard to pointing toward what I'm saying that we need to look upon, or perhaps the conclusions that we may draw. But I'm going to leave those to you. So, okay, let's look at this from that that 22 miles out in space, or that 50-mile mark out in space, and begin to understand when we look at this planet, what do we see? I need you to go through those questions in your own head. What are you seeing when you're looking at this planet? I mean, I'm seeing what appears like to be land masses. I'm seeing some swirling bodies of clouds that indicate some movement of wind. the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that this appears to be a sphere, and it appears to have much more what appears to be ocean or water than there is land. And that's what I want us to focus on right off, because folks, that's what we need to understand is going on here. Um, it's not about the land, it's about the globe. So what does that bring us to? That brings us to an immediate understanding of, if they want the globe, they're going to have to target everyone. They're going to have to target everybody. And so what I've just pulled up is a survey just sent out by the Smart Cities Council, a survey asking every single city in America to deliver to the UN, the Google UN Smart Cities Agreement Program, the answers to this survey with regard to their individual city. Sorry, I may need to get a glass of water here, if you bear with me. Okay, so we now have global entities and corporations and empire speaking directly to our people and avoiding our government. Now, you can already guess, that hey, our government is involved in that, or hey, our government is not involved in that, or they're just oblivious. Well, what we're going to find tonight is that they're thoroughly involved in it all, and we need to be aware of that. Now, we've got folks like Adam Schiff who have been a timely problem, consistent and enduring problem with regard to our trying to find our way out of this calamity. And it appears that now they've found some 256 emails between Schiff and Jeffrey Epstein. So Schiff is being inculcated into the middle of this, and it is very interesting how it's working itself out. I'm going to read a little bit of this. This is America's Last Line of Defense. The rabbit hole of Epstein's heinous crimes seems to get deeper each day. It appears that every day someone new is revealed to have taken numerous trips to Epstein Isle for, quote, unknown, end quote, reasons. Because of this, it is assumed that they are perverts. This time, according to an FBI investigation, it has been revealed that none other than Adam Schiff was a close associate of Jeffrey Epstein. Last month, Attorney General Bill Barr launched an investigation into political rivals, the Democrats. The investigation focuses mainly on the impeachment of Democrats, namely Adam Schiff. The results of the impeachment was troubling, to say the least. A treasure trove of emails was found on Hillary's private email server. Among these emails were 256 between Adam Schiff and Epstein. The contents of these emails discuss trips to Epstein's Isle and other things too vile to mention. Below is an excerpt of an FBI report, and it's strange. It says, after an extensive sweep of the compound, our agents found many emails on the server. This was the most disturbing. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? No, I thought not. It's not the story the Jedi would tell you. It's a Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midichlorians to create life. He had such knowledge of the dark side that he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying. He could actually save people from death. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. What happened to him? He became so powerful, the only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew. Then his apprentice killed him in his sleep. It's ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself, end quote. These revelations are truly sickening, but not surprising. This explains why Schiff was so hell-bent on impeaching our president. It was just a distraction to throw us off the scent of his vile crimes against humanity. So as we move on, I want to focus on Ghislaine Maxwell because she is the key. And she's the key in our understanding that she has been part of a much greater plan for the deep state, that she's an actual high-level player. And being a high-level player, she has escaped she's escaped arrest because she's been rewarded for doing a good job. So we're going to hear from her herself. I'm going to bring this back to the beginning, and this is Ghislaine Maxwell talking about the Terramar project. So I want us to go through this because we need to understand some of these things. When we look at that globe, we look at that original globe, what we're seeing is that the planet is much more water than it is land.
On the stage here, we have Ghislaine Maxwell, founder and president of the Terramar Project, a nonprofit whose mission is to create a global ocean community to protect and promote sustainable development of the ocean. Ghislaine is easily one of the smartest, most fascinating people I've ever met. This is proven by the fact that she holds a bachelor's and master's degree from Oxford University, is a private helicopter pilot, a trained EMT, a qualified ROV, which I had to look up what that was.
Okay, so now we've got a guy that's obviously infatuated with the guest he's got coming up. He's eager to introduce her, and she's been introduced as a specialist in sustainable development, to form a ocean community. And so we need to understand, we immediately our hackles go up and we say, wow, sustainable development, that's UN talk, and a global community, that's Clinton talk. So now we know that she's playing as a player in all of these realms.
And a deep worker submarine pilot, in addition to being fluent in 4 languages. This is what I had written down before I realized that she spoke at the UN 9 times since the last time I saw her. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ghislaine Maxwell.
Thank you. Excellent. Good afternoon.
It's important for us to remember, this is a very dark character. This is a very privileged character. This is somebody who's done what she wanted to do for her whole life because she had the ability to just do whatever she wanted to do. And so we've got to understand we're dealing with somebody who is not a nice person, but is very powerful in global events.
I noticed that my speech today was leveraging technology to create a global ocean community. I'm going to change that on you, and I'm going to leverage technology to create a new country. Now, I know I speak with...
So we got to stop. She's now saying that they're going to leverage technology in sustainable development to create a new country. Wow, that's an eye-opener, folks. So imagine, now let your mind wander a bit. If the oceans are international waters, what do you have to do in order to create countries in the oceans?
With a funny accent, and so yes, I did say country, not company. So, with that, I'm the founder of an internet project called the Terramar Project. It's an ocean-based digital platform which I'm going to be talking to you about. I just want to go back briefly to talk to you about why I got involved in the ocean, and because I think it's important to have history.
Okay, before she goes into her reasoning for being involved in the ocean, she just said something very interesting. It's an internet-based digital project for ocean development.
So I started diving when I was 9, having become passionate about the ocean, watching Jacques Cousteau on TV. And it led to a lifelong exploration around the ocean that ultimately ended with me becoming a deep worker submersible pilot. On one of my first submarine dives, I was absolutely so excited. I thought, my goodness, I'm going to see a new sea creature. I'm going to be this amazing explorer. And off I was. I went down into the deep, and I went down to over 1,500 feet. And at 1,500 feet, I switched on the lights, hoping to see a new mythical sea creature. But in fact, what I saw was a plastic hanger.
So now she's pulling the cord of ocean sustainability and pollution. But we have to ask ourselves, here we've got a submarine pilot who's now down at 1,500 feet. And I'd have to ask you, how many people went out to these islands with her for that purpose? To take the money from their pockets to invest in building new countries and producing sustainable development of the ocean floor.
I was so absolutely devastated, but it was at that moment that I realized that I was really going to dedicate the rest of my life to taking an involvement with and bringing an education around the ocean. So I just want to ask everybody here a quick question. If I told you that you own something versus rent it, would you care for it more, look after it more if you owned it than if you didn't own it? Please, if you...
Now, she makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've got a person before us that seems, reasonable, seems likable, seems amenable, but to imagine the horrors that she's been involved in and the things that she's done, we need to remember that the Lord sees the heart. He doesn't just see, the person that's well-dressed and well-spoken standing before us who has nice platitudes. This woman has done horrible, horrible things to children. We need to remember that.
If you think that you'd look after something more if you owned it, raise your hands. Well, I think that's about 100%. So the good news is that I want to tell you that you actually own 45% of the planet. So let's quickly just look at this map. 71% of the planet is ocean. 64% of that ocean lies outside of any single country's jurisdiction. And under the law, that 64% of the ocean belongs to each and every one of you in this room.
Okay, now I need to stop you because this is where I need folks to immediately ramp up, grab a hold of the information you've just been given and make some real quick conclusions. Because what has happened, this woman brought this information before the United Nations. And what did the United Nations do? Well, we can't have people making their own countries in 64% of the international waters. We have to own it all.
It's called your global commons. So the assets of that 64% are yours. The fish, the oil, the gas, the diamonds. Now, this part of the world is just becoming...
You see how she said diamonds? Do you think she got their attention at the UN when she spoke there some 12 times in the last 24 years?
Much is just coming into focus. Think about the Malaysian plane that went missing. Think about endless hours on CNN and TV and every news network that focused on this area as they were looking for the plane. Every day we heard, we found the plane, we found the plane, we found some piece of garbage floating, and it turned out, in fact, no, it wasn't the plane, it was just some ocean trash. Today, if you open your newspapers, the front page of your newspapers are focused on clashes between China and the Philippines, and China and Thailand on ocean-related issues. So the ocean is the next frontier. It's the next big debate. It's the next...
Okay, I do agree with her on this point. The ocean is the next frontier. However, let's go back for a moment to that ball-shaped planet that we saw. We need to realize the wisdom of Donald Trump, because not only do we now have some information on which to make some differing analyses, if we're going to grow population-wise, we can't just be limited to the land. So we have three choices, and Donald Trump understands all these, and so does the NWO. And that is go subterranean, which they've done, go in the oceans, which they're planning on doing, and go into space, which Donald Trump is quickly maneuvering to outsmart them, because if you capture the space, you can see into the depths. So let's go back to what we were doing before.
Big grab of space, of ocean space, if you will. America alone has about the size, 2.5 times the size of the Louisiana Purchase to be had through the continental shelf issues. Why is the ocean so important to us? Outside of the fact that under there lie millions of dollars or billions of dollars of assets and the fish, I'd like you all to take a huge, deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. One more time. That second breath was created for you by the ocean.
So she's going to focus on this, you know, the sustainability of the oceans. But I'm going to move on from this video because I believe that she has thrown out context out there that most people will not grasp, because unlike the Patriots, unlike the Anons, they're looking at it from a green perspective. They're looking at it from a sustainability perspective. They're looking at it from a pollution perspective. And we're looking at it as a power play to take over the earth and create a one world government. And that's what they've done. They've used this information that they got from Ghislaine Maxwell and her colleagues, the board of directors at Terramar, to develop a method by which they would take over the entire planet. And that method is called Agenda 2030. Now, you will see as we go into this that the board members of Terramar Project are the ones that gave them the information to write Agenda 2030. Okay, so we're dealing with a charity, and folks, they say this charity has gone away. Do not believe that. This charity went into an encrypted app environment. It disappeared from public eyes, but it is out there in the ether space in an encrypted platform. Okay, so don't believe that when they say they killed this. They did not. They Epstein got killed, and so they hid it, but it's not dead. It's out there. So Ghislaine Maxwell, it says, abruptly torpedoed her oceanic nonprofit in the wake of the scandal surrounding her associate Jeffrey Epstein. She took away all evidence of its material existence, but it's still out there. Embattled socialite Ghislaine Maxwell seemingly sank her own oceanic conservancy group less than a week after her longtime associate Jeffrey Epstein was arrested on sex trafficking charges. Maxwell has been accused of acting as the convicted sexual predator's accomplice, recruiting underage girls and abusing them alongside Epstein, allegations that she publicly denied in 2015. The British native is the youngest child of the late media mogul Robert Maxwell, who died in 1991 while cruising on the Lady Ghislaine, a yacht named for his daughter. For years, she was also vocal in the press about her passion for oceanic conservancy. Now, her venture, the Terramar Project, appears to have been swept off by the tide of scrutiny and criticism that sprung up in the wake of Epstein's arrest. The nonprofit, started in stated intent, according to tax documents published on ProPublica and reviewed by Business Insider, was to, quote, to create a global ocean community to give a voice to the least protected, most ignored part of our planet, the high seas, end quote. Business Insider's emails to Maxwell's legal representatives were not returned. Now, what I'm going to say to you is that this may have been what she originally determined that she wanted to bring about. What it turned into was the method by which to conquer the globe. And she and Epstein were global players of mega proportions in bringing people into line, powerful people into line through blackmail and serving their satanic desire for children. And children are an asset. If you are a satanic member of the pedophilia world, you look at children as an asset. You look at human beings as assets. And we need to understand that. That's how they're looking at it. They're looking at, here's a globe, here's the assets in that globe. How do we take ownership of all of the assets of the globe to our own desires? Okay. This fellow will go through who he is here pretty soon, but she's speaking at the United Nations here.
Who really has something called Terramar Project. She controls the oceans around the world. If you were to look up the website, you have the opportunity to buy up parts of the ocean through her. And really, the Sustainable Oceans Alliance came together at the insistence of one person who is in the room. I don't know, I have to look for him. His name is Stephen Haft. Where is Stephen? Oh, Stephen, please get up.
I'll go into Stephen Haft here shortly. He's one of the board members of the Terramar Project. Stephen
has been a passionate person behind the Oceans Alliance saying we need to do something, and he got us together, Ambassador Beck and I, and with Ghislaine Maxwell, and we set up the Oceans Alliance. And we are very grateful to Stephen for his support. And therefore, I invite my dear friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, to tell us how we can.
Okay, so now you've seen 4 board members. You've got an ambassador. You've got a movie producer. You've got a mover and shaker in the British world and the European world. And you've got this fella right here who's announcing them. Now, he's already posed that you can go and buy up parts of the ocean. Did you know you could do that, folks? No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
Own the oceans. You have 3 seconds. Thank you. Please.
I'll do my best. First of all, Your Excellencies, Presidents, Lords, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, so this is in 2014. This is after Epstein's been arrested. This is after everything is already known. And this woman is at our UN, the UN here in New York, addressing the UN as a guest.
I just would like to thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here. I'm here representing civil society. My passion for the ocean, for those of you, there's a slideshow going up there, so you don't just have to hear me, you can see the pictures as well. Started when I was a little girl. I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau on TV and became mesmerized with the oceans. It led to me becoming a deep worker submersible pilot. And ultimately, on one of my first dives, where I went down expecting to see a fish, I switched on the lights at the bottom of the ocean and saw a plastic hanger. It was in that moment, actually, that I decided that I really wanted to focus my attention.
Okay, so now we've got the emotional aspect of the oceans are being destroyed, and we need to play that card that the sustainable development card. We need to use that as our leverage, the emotional leverage, the social engineering to generate enough desire to bring about a one world government. And that's what they've done, folks, is they've used this lady and her compadres to develop the sustainable goals, the Agenda 2030. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to see that they've, you know, they have virtue signaled their way, they have emoted their way, they have created environments where here she is talking again, and here's one of her board members talking again at the Community for Oceans. So she's been all over the world giving these speeches for years and years, and this is in 2013 when Epstein was arrested, right? So she's been everywhere. So it's not as if she was avoiding or you know, being some kind of spirited, you know, Mossad agent or anything like that. She was a player in the UN circles globally. And we knew it, and the Clintons knew it, and our State Department knew it. Everybody knew it. And so she was doing what they wanted her to do. And so why put her in jail? She was part of the mix. Okay, the Terramar Project. Terramar Project was founded on September 26, 2012 at the Blue Ocean Film Festival Conservation Conference in Monterey, California. So she was in Monterey in 2012. And it focused on the 64% of the oceans that lie outside a single country's jurisdiction. Folks, they're planning on making nations out of the ocean floor. Their mission was to create a global ocean community based on the idea of shared ownership of the global commons, also known as high seas or international waters. It's the creation of the NWO, folks. That's what they're doing. 2014, on behalf of Terramar Project, Maxwell gave a lecture at the University of Texas. So she was in Texas. She was at the TED Talk about the importance of ocean conservation. She spoke at the United Nations. She was founder of the Terramar Project. She accompanied Stuart Beck. Now, Stuart Beck is an ambassador, 2013 Terramar board member, to 2 United Nations meetings to discuss the project. So do you think they got the UN's attention when they came up with a way to declare one world, that all of the oceans would be owned by different governments, and that they could set the parameters for travel in those oceans and conduct in those oceans as if they were governments? Are you beginning to follow me here? So she spoke in Reykjavik in Iceland. She spoke with Scott Borgeson, a boyfriend of hers, and they went to the Governing the Oceans Commons Growing Challenges New Approaches Conference. Stephen Haft was a board member. Now, Stephen Haft, we'll go through him in a minute. So we've got a UK private listed foundation of conservancy. Bear with me. Got somebody calling. Hang on a second. I'm going to stop the record for a second. It's good to be back with you. Thank you for allowing me to take that call. Wonderful believer. Tell me some good stories. Okay, let's get back into the information. We'll get the share back up here. Okay, the Terramar Project, we discussed that. It started in 2012 and supposedly was shut down roughly in 2019. But as I said, from my understanding, it has moved up onto an encrypted app. So we could still find it if we had the capacity to go encrypted. Okay, sustainable development. This is what they ended up sponsoring, which was the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, you can imagine the UN was excited when they finally figured out the method by which to create a one world government. Here are their 17 goals. Isn't that funny? 17. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for the goals. So this is what they've been selling our children. This is what they've been teaching our children. And as we can see, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, the 17 of them, Q, were set in motion in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly under UN Resolution 70/1, the 2030 Agenda. Okay, global commons. Global commons is what Ghislaine Maxwell referred to as it describes the international, supranational, or global resource domains in which common pool resources are found. Global commons include the Earth's shared natural resources such as high oceans, the atmosphere, the outer space, and the Antarctic. It's funny the Antarctic is mentioned there because we're finding that everybody's really curious about what's going on in the Antarctic right now, as well as the cyberspace. We never thought about that as additional space, but that really is. It is the Internet of Things. It is the Internet of Space. It may also meet the definition of a global common. Global commons is a term typically used to describe international, supranational, global resource domains in which common pool resources are found in economics, common goods, and are rivalrous and non-excludable, constituting one of four main types of goods. A common pool resource, also called a common property resource, is a special case of a common good or a public good whose size or characteristics make it costly, but not impossible to exclude potential users. So what we're saying is that it all belongs to everybody because most people can't afford to just buy it. But what they're dealing with now is they want to own everything. They want all to be part of the common good. You can imagine how this is affecting our children. This seems very rational, it seems very logical, and it includes communism, which they're selling as a peaceful method by which everyone will own everything. And that's how they've gotten ISD Global involved, who got the Swedish involved, and the Swedish brought up Greta Thunberg to help sell our children on this, the global children on this aspect of, can't we all just play together? International waters. International waters apply where any of the following types of bodies of water or drainage basins transcend international boundaries: oceans, large marine ecosystems, enclosed or semi-enclosed regional seas, and estuaries, rivers, lakes, groundwater systems, aquifers, and wetlands. In 2030, the Agenda 2030, the UN will own all of this, in the United States as well. So you can see why they have to defeat us, and they have to defeat us well in advance of 2030, because this agenda is supposed to be complete by 2030. All 17 measures have to be completed by 2030. Here's Emile Dersal. I remember I told you I would get to this fella. He's one of the board members for the Terramar project. Dersal was the United Nations Chief Liaison for Partnerships. He developed strategic alliances with governments, corporations, foundations, philanthropists to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. One of Dersal's responsibilities was as the UN's representative for the partnership with media mogul Ted Turner's US $1 billion donation. So they're dependent upon corporate donations to leverage this sustainable development goals. And so you can see why they're generating a squad that wants to generate the Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal is supposed to bring the money together to fund the strategic development goals, the sustainable goals. So Amir Dersal is the member that played that role in bringing the money together. through these foundations, the UN Foundation, the UN Democracy Fund, and that's what he specializes in, is bringing in this money from disparate donors. So you bring in the right players carry the ball. Stephen Haft was born in Manhattan, raised in Flushing, Queens, the son of Helen and Nathan Huddy Haft. He graduated Hofstra University School of Law, and he's a member of the bar of the U.S. Supreme Court. He's an interesting character, as he's accepted a position with AOL, where he served as vice president and chief strategy officer for $1.2 billion in sales and interactive marketing group. He left AOL and founded the media consultancy company IndieWorks, which focuses on the impact of emerging technologies on media. His clients included Comcast, corporate public broadcasting, college television network, Air Media, Edelman, Burleson Marsteller. He presently serves as Senior Vice President of Innovation for magazine publisher Time Incorporated. Well, Haft has also produced some movies. So Haft has been involved in the environmental issues, human rights, and arts and education since the 70s. He served as board of United States variant of Terramar Project, which was the United Nations NGO that promoted the Clean Oceans provision of Sustainable Development Goals program. Haft served on the board until Terramar announced that it ended operations in 2019, July 12th of last year, after sex trafficking charges against Jeffrey Epstein, associate of Ghislaine Maxwell, became public. He's also produced some movies. In fact, he produced the Dead Poets Society, the movie producer, pretty famous guy. So, been involved with Robert Redford. You can see why they went out to the Carmel Film Festival to launch this Terramar project. Then we have Stuart Beck. Stuart Beck, another board member for Terramar. Now, Stuart is the ambassador of Palau. And Stuart was the one that collectively came up with this idea, the sustainable idea, and the idea that the Palau is not, it's a series of islands, a small island that, near the Philippines, that has been basically overseen by the UN and by the US since the Second World War. But he saw a new way to create the model for the UN, and he presented that to the UN General Assembly, and he presented the Palau Initiative, which became basically the idea behind the Agenda 2030. So it is safe to say that the Terramar is the one that effectively generated the Agenda 2030. Now you can see how important Ghislaine Maxwell is at that point. If to the UN, she's one of the original motivators or producers of the Agenda 2030, pretty big stuff. Her boyfriend, Scott Borgeson, was also part of Terramar, has been linked to sex friend Jeffrey Epstein's ex-girlfriend and alleged Madam Ghislaine Maxwell. But who is Borgeson? Here's everything that we know. Borgeson is 43-year-old CEO of Cargometrics. The company processes data analytics for maritime trade and shipping. He had mostly recently been valued at $100 million. Borgeson lives in a sprawling 2.3 million oceanfront mansion in Massachusetts. Well, she was hiding in that mansion for a while, I believe, or maybe in one of Epstein's, if I'm correct. Well, what are his links to Ghislaine Maxwell? Let's see. He reported back in August that Borgeson was a boyfriend of Ghislaine Maxwell. Borgeson denies this claim, insisting they're just old friends. It was alleged that Epstein's ex had stolen the CEO from his ex-wife 5 years ago in 2013. Mail claims that the pair met at an ocean preservation conference, with Borgeson's devastated wife only uncovering the affair when she viewed a video of Borgeson and Maxwell kissing and cuddling. They say that Maxwell had been living in Borgeson's oceanfront pad, hiding out in in the build-up to Epstein's arrest. So she's been involved with, many of these folks who are highly powerful individuals who are well known throughout the world. Okay, now to their plan. They really have outsmarted us, folks. They really have a significant plan, and it is a grassroots plan. And what they've done is they've gone and they've started what's called the Physicians for Social Responsibility. They've gotten these different groups involved, and they've got them all to sign a climate compact and agreements with the UN to act a certain way in their groups. And being a part of the climate ambassadors has been a really empowering experience for me since joining. I've been supported in writing letters to the editor and been able to meet with several of my elected representatives to discuss the health impacts of climate change. Through this experience, I've become a stronger advocate for my future patients. So now we've got a cadre of doctors who have signed the Global Compact and are treating their patients in a certain global manner with a certain global aspect to it. And it's all run by the UN, or so we think. And then they've gotten PSR ambassadors. PSR LA Ambassador Program provides issues and skills training for physicians and health professionals on how to be effective advocates with policymakers, the media, their peers, and general public. As physician-based organization, PSR LA's strength lies in the ability to bring the credible voice of physicians and health professionals to the policy debates. Now you can see why Obamacare was so widely accepted, because they had laid the groundwork. This is in LA. They had laid the groundwork for basically a one world global communist physicians program that was based upon sustainable objectives. And so they sold these people on it, and they sold it through the Smart Cities program and the Strong City Network. And they got these people involved from a grassroots point of view and went around our government to do it. But Obama was on board. He launched this at the UN in 2015 with Ghislaine Maxwell and others to bring this about. So he was supposed to set up this country to fall right in line with being directed by the United Nations and others, which is what's been happening. And that's why we're in such a predicament right now with this virus, because the virus, and let's be clear, this is a UN-launched virus. This is a cabal-launched virus. This is a conglomerate Agenda 2030 launched virus, because you're going to see Gates and all the players are all involved in Agenda 2030. They're all involved in this. This is the whole world coming together to bring down the United States. And that's a very difficult concept for us to understand. Okay, what about Palau? What about these islands? Well, when you start talking about islands, you start talking about, multiple small islands like this. Well, is this the country, just the parts that are sticking up out of the earth, which is how we've typically viewed it before, because the land mass is the actual territory of the country. But how they're viewing it now, and now why China is trying to protect certain areas, is because what they're saying is, no, this is the country. This whole block is the country, and so therefore this is all our territory too, and we're able to farm it, we're able to sell it, we're able to mine it, we're able to take the gold out of it, and so we're going to set new country boundaries all over the world and divide up the oceans. Island states more risk and benefit of suing big emitters. So what they've done is they've set up these sustainable development goals, and anybody who violates those goals, they can now charge them taxes. And so that's what this initiative has brought about, is that this now, anybody who comes into my realm, and I can now control. Can you imagine, once they develop this whole idea that U.S. nuclear-powered carriers will not be able to go anywhere on the seas, because the seas will belong to the island, and they will not allow nuclear powered carriers in their area. Can you imagine what this does to us nationally? Tiny islands are getting some big league help in their quest to haul major emitters into International Court over global warming, but they're fearful the United States and China might punish them for cutting off foreign aid. Germany, Ireland, and Switzerland have vowed support for the Republic of Palau, which is leading a coalition of vulnerable nations in a landmark campaign to make climate change a matter of international law. The backing of both European nations brings support for a resolution before the UN General Assembly of 33 countries and is considered a major boost to the case. Now, we as patriots need to go back and understand what Q has given us, that we have Rothschilds, we have Soros, we have the family of Al-Assad. They are backing this entire thing. So we have a cabal that's running through the United Nations, that's running through the banks, that's running through the universities, that's running through all the governments, that has now developed a grassroots program where they are selling our children and selling our physicians and selling our academicians on maintaining and achieving sustainable development goals by 2030. So they basically, Obama gave them the capacity to direct our nation from afar. Okay, what are we looking at here? This is from Italy. Because of the little progress in international climate change negotiations, academics and civil society started questioning whether and how it is possible to provoke proceedings before national tribunals in order to clarify the international legal principles and obligations concerning the limitation and the elimination of greenhouse gas GHG emissions. So what they've done is they've set these sustainable goal initiatives, and they're forcing all the world countries who've signed this global UN pact to fall into line. And what it means by falling into line is that you are going to fund the roughly $3 trillion that they need every year in order to achieve these global objectives. What is the Palau Pledge? The Palau is a model for the Sustainable Development Goals, and what they did was they came up with a pledge, and everyone that comes in their country has to take the pledge. Children of Palau, I take this pledge as your guest to preserve and protect your beautiful and unique island home. I vow to tread lightly, act kindly, and explore mindfully. I shall not take what is not given. I shall not harm what does not harm me. The only footprint I shall leave are those that will wash away. So this country is determined that they are going to be a model for these sustainable development goals, and everyone that comes within their government, their country guidelines, their boundaries, has to take this pledge and has to perform according to the UN Compact. And that came from the Terramar Project, from the ambassador who is a board member of the Terramar Project. Can you imagine how they benefited from it? Okay, so they actively participated in formulating the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Accordingly, Palau welcomes the VNR as an opportunity to reflect on achievements and acknowledge vulnerabilities while accelerating progress toward a global development paradigm characterized by resilience, sustainability, and equity, an era of sustainable development. So you can see that Obama pitched this and signed on this global compact in 2015. He knew 2016 was coming up. He knew Hillary was coming in. He was to set this up and get us committed to it, and then Hillary was going to take us down and make us part of the one world government. And we were going to fund those strategic development goals for the world. Okay. Sustainable Development Goals Knowledge Platform. There's a high-level political platform, United Nations Central Platform for follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, and the Sustainable Development Goals provides for a full and effective participation of all state members, nation states, and members of specialized areas. So what we're dealing with is now the whole world is really angry at us because President Trump has basically stopped them from achieving this objective. And so we have the whole world trying to destroy the United States because they're looking at us as the one group that will not play along with their objectives. So Palau, what they did was they became an independent nation. They were in receivership in World War II. We basically the military still has 50 years to review whether they need places on the island. But what they've done is they've seceded from the UN and from the United States, and they are now their own country, and they're setting their own boundaries, and they have sovereignty in the Pacific Islands. Now, when we look at the Pacific Islands, we need to remember the islands that are in there. You know, we got Peleliu, we've got the island hopping campaign, which the U.S. ended up taking most of those islands in an endeavor to stop the Japanese. Well, ocean farming in Palau, what's that look like? Okay, remember I told you no longer are they going to be looking at the island that sticks up as your territorial boundaries, but now we can see that here's the islands of Palau, but they're now saying this is the country. So the ocean floor is now going to become part of their country. So now they not only own the territorial waters, but now they own the international waters beyond. So basically, they're dividing up the earth now. They're trying to divide up that additional 64% of the globe that is not currently owned by any other government. And they're being very smart about it. They're coming up with, methods to, like Palau is farming giant clams. They have giant clam farms. They have areas where they can plant. They can put floating islands out there, and they can plant on the islands, and they can plant underneath the floating islands. They can grow cattle on those floating islands. It really has become a one world initiative. We call Australia, they call it Oceania, and this is how it's in the Philippine Islands. The Palau Islands are in the Philippine Sea. Okay. Chelsea Clinton unveiled new commitments to action on second day of 2013 Clinton Global Initiative annual meeting. So now we're going to see these foundations who are involved in all of this, and this is 2015. And so we now see that we've got a whole bunch of foundations that have Clinton next to them or are involved with the Clintons are all wrapped up in this because, and I'm going to say something that I haven't proven yet, but I do believe is going to pan out, is that the Clintons have been involved in this Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein blackmail roundup of world leaders to bring them in line for the Sustainable Development Goals. Those that they could not get to sign on the dotted line, now they are able to blackmail them into participation. And I believe that that's going to pan out. Terramar Project consists of Maxwell celebrities, scientists. Sylvia Earle, which I know many of you folks know her, in 2014 was the National Geographic Society, helped give the project initial credibility, as did Dan Leffelay, at the time Marine Vice Chair of the International Union for Conservation of Natural World Commission on the Protected Area. He was the publisher of Dead Poets Society and served on the project board of directors, as did businessman and United Nations official Amir Dosal. Brian Urasitis was listed as Terramar's project Director of Development as of August 17, 2019. So That's as late as last year. Former Coast Guardsman Robert Foose served as Director of Development and Chief of Staff for Terramar. So they're really integrated. We're not going to sign up for that. We'll just go past that one. Okay, where is this taking us to? Okay, I'm not going to go to Stephen Haft because we've already touched him. Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. How is China involved in this? Well, China is heading up a lot of this through the UN, and Taedong Zhao, Head Global Development Division, CIKD, Center for International Knowledge on Development of China. So China is in the process of trying to meet these goals. And every country is having to put out a report on where they are with regard to these sustainable development goals. So now we've got countries all around the world who the UN is directing them to achieve these objectives. Can you see the conflict with a country like the United States that is a sovereign nation? Implementing the 2030 Agenda. How China is implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Report 2019 shows that while advances have been made in some areas, monumental challenges remain. The world is not on track to end poverty, and millions still live in hunger. People in absolute poverty will remain at 6% by 2030, falling short of the 3% goal. It is also alarming that undernourished people went up from 784 million in 2015 to 820 million in 2017. So they're failing at their objectives, and it's just like communism is all the time, and it's just like the UN is all the time. They have these lofty ideals, they have these objectives which are ideologies, and then they meet the reality of trying to produce those objectives, and they're having a hard time now because Donald Trump is not going to provide them the money to fund China into making these changes that they need to make in order to reach the 2030 objective. So you can imagine China is really trying to force us to make these changes. China's Progress Report Implementation 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was also unveiled at UN headquarters in September 2019. This second progress report since the adoption of 2030 Agenda in 2015 takes stock of China's progress in pursuing the SDGs, identifies the gaps, and formulates plans for the next steps. The report features cases depicting efforts by Chinese government at all levels, also showing how the private sector and general public are contributing. So how is China implementing the SDGs through its development policies? China is pushing its sustainable development forward in three key areas: eradicating extreme poverty, building an ecological civilization, and contributing to global climate and sustainability governance. So now what folks, we're beginning to see all this tied together in Google, building these smart cities, in Chongqing. We've got smart cities going up all over the world because this is all a cooperative effort to achieve Agenda 2030. And Bill Gates and all these knuckleheads are wrapped up in the midst of this. And so what we see, I'm going to say straight up, that this virus was released as a cooperative effort to force us into meeting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Okay, the future we want, and again, in transforming our world, they're going to force us to meet these objectives. And that virus was developed to bring us all into a coalesced global movement to fight a global problem, and that global problem would produce the coalescence between governments to achieve a global objective, which would allow them to coalesce us around meeting all their SDG goals. Well, I look at this paper, and I don't see many people from the United States, but I do see Amanda Glassman, Center for Global Development USA. Well, Amanda Glassman is now turning into a critic of Donald Trump. Now that makes sense, because here we have someone who's in charge of meeting global objectives for, let's see if I can backtrack this a little bit. I'll play this for you. We have somebody who's in charge of meeting these global objectives for 2030 sustainable development goals, and President Trump is holding them back.
Trump's WHO attacks are an attempt to deflect blame from his own mishandling of the coronavirus outbreak, and one that will end up hurting the U.S. Amanda Glassman, a public health expert and executive vice president of the Center for Global Development think tank, noted the world doesn't just face today's threat of COVID-19 but also the threat of future pandemics, which are more likely because of increased zoonotic transmission.
Okay, so now they're threatening the world, and they're saying that it's Donald Trump's fault because Donald Trump is not allowing us to come together as one globe and resolve this global pandemic in a method that allows us to achieve what we wanted to achieve from the outset, which is global one world order, is a government of the globe beginning to give global orders. And this Amanda Glassman is the executive president of senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. And so she is responsible, one of the responsible parties, for seeing these 2030 objectives met. Now, she's the only American on there. So here she is giving our president a hard time because, quote, he's not falling in and playing along as a nice NWOer. Okay, now this is going to raise your hackles, because now we've got the Jesuits of Maryland, right? And I told you Georgetown University was formed 13 years after the Pope had already put an end to the Jesuits. How is that possible? Because he didn't put an end to the Jesuits. He just said he put an end to the Jesuits. And now we get to the Ignatian delegation participates in UN's high-level political forum on sustainable development. Well, if we look into the Ignatians, the Jesuits, right? The Jesuits, and we know there are problems with the Jesuits because we're looking at the black popes, and we're looking at a wartime group that has now signed on to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda. The Jesuits have signed on to it, and guess who is a major Jesuit? Sorry, my mouse is acting a little funny. But if you scroll through this paperwork, what you'll find is that Dr. Fauci, oh, here we go, Dr. Anthony Fauci is a Jesuit, and these are his partners. And he has subscribed to the 2030 Agenda goals. And he is a speaker at this Ignatian delegation participation event in the UN's high-level political forum on sustainable development in July of 2019, just last year in New York City. So he's fully signed in, folks, to this Agenda 2030, and he's a Jesuit. So, you know, it's getting really crucial that we understand that all these folks are involved in this. As a black man living in America, the video of George Floyd's suffocation cues unhealed experiences with police in this country and makes me less optimistic will change between the black community and the police will soon change. So they're promoting the downfall of this nation. So how many of you trust Fauci now? Reaching everyone's everywhere with life-saving vaccines. Now we've got the WHO, we've got the UN, we've got Anthony Fauci, Fauci is the director of U.S. National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases in 2017, signing on to the SDG global objectives and saying that we will meet these objectives with regard to vaccines because that's part of our SDG objectives. Do you trust Fauci now? Here we go again. Margaret Chan, Director, General of WHO, Chris Elias, President of the Global Development Program. At the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Anthony Fauci, Director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. They're all involved in this 2030 global objective, and they've released this virus on purpose to force us into global action to reach their sustainable development goals and produce vaccines, which is part of the sustainable development goals. Now we're looking into sustainable investing. If you're going to have these sustainable development goals, you have to have investors. And that's what they look at the United States as. We're the cash cow. We're supposed to be paying for all of this, right? So the global lockdown of 2020 has significant implications on the market, government fiscal policy, and the education sector. Colleges and universities need to adapt or drown in the rising tide of expenses that are not offset by revenues as tuition payments and other funding declines during the lockdown. Colleges and universities' ability to survive by adapting to the lockdown depends on whether the cost of providing college classes can be adjusted by the new reality. So now we're dealing with finances, and we've got people who are being forced into raising money through this COVID-19 program to meet their strategic development objectives. Because remember, universities are going to be required to meet SDGs as well. Cities are required to meet SDGs. Governments all over are required to meet SDGs. Physicians have to meet SDGs. So they are forcing us to meet these strategic development goals. Time for solidarity. Here it is. Now we're seeing the new mask thing. It says that the masks are now being promoted as a solidarity, as a partnership, as a sustainable development partnership. We are trying to meet these human rights goals, these SDG goals, based upon what the UN dictates we need to achieve by 2030. Solidarity. That's what they're selling. They're selling solidarity, folks. And we won't play along. And so therefore, we need to be shamed into being, why won't we, join along and join in the kumbaya and create the solidarity of nations. Okay, Greenbelt and Road. Now I know several other mods have gone through this, but it's tied right into the 2030 objective for sustainable development. The Green Road and Belt is all tied into it. And if you see these members, you see all the same members over and over again from the UN and from ASEAN and all these folks who are trying to reach the Belt and Road Project. But the Belt and Road Project was designed to meet the green objectives of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So it's all part of the Chinese solution. Since being proposed, the Belt and Road Initiative has been well received in more countries. Now it's become a Chinese solution for participation in global openness and cooperation, improving global environmental governance system, promoting shared development and prosperity. In May of 17, the Belt and Road Summit for International Cooperation was held. 29 heads of states and representatives from more than 130 countries and 70 international organizations gathered in Beijing to discuss new progress in the development of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's all to meet the 2030 objectives. And we are supposed to help them pay for it. Okay, the Digital Silk Road. So remember, part of this thinking of land and stuff includes the internet, because the internet is space. By aligning the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, spearheaded by the government of China, has the potential to enhance connectivity as a catalyst for trade and development from Asia to Europe, stretching down to Africa. To make the most of this opportunity, physical connectivity needs to be complemented by digital connectivity. The Trade Facilitation Recommendation and electronic business standards developed at UNECE can help make it a reality. Now we can see why there's such a push for us to set up DARPAs everywhere, to set up NSFs everywhere, because everybody needs to reach these objectives. And so Obama and Hillary and Rothschilds and all these folks are working together with Soros, with the Al-Assads, with the Israelis, with the Swiss, with the UN, to bring about these sustainable objectives by 2030. So that's what all this is about. That's what all the Belt and Road Project is. It's the United Nations coming up with wonderful ideas to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And UNDP, China is playing a huge role in achieving these objectives. So they're being engaged on many different levels, and so we're being forced by China. The UNDP engagement in BRI is primarily aimed at assisting BRI partners countries to achieve their sustainable development goals by using opportunities provided by the Belt and Road in a way that is aligned their development strategies led by China Country Office UNDP support through advisory services, technical assistance, capacity building, and pilot projects structured around the following 4 areas. So China's in charge of forcing these other countries to meet the Belt and Road Project objectives, to meet the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. Cultural survival. These are the 10 cultural survival expectations that will allow them to achieve the 17 objectives. Global Compact Principles. This is the compact that everyone has signed, including Obama, in 2015. Respect and support internationally recognized human rights in your area of influence. Ensure that the company does not participate in any way in violation of human rights. Now, this is all laughable because we have many pedophilia folks at the heads of these agencies who are signing this global compact, knowing all along that they're going to look at children as an asset from the outset. Number 3, support freedom of association and recognize to open collective bargaining. Number 4, eliminate all forms of forced or compulsory labor. Number 5, eradicate all forms of child labor in the productive chain. Number 6, stimulate all practices that eliminate any form of discrimination at the workplace. Number 7, assume a responsible, preventive, and proactive posture towards environmental challenges. Number 8, develop initiatives and practice to promote and develop social and environmental responsibility. Number 9, promote the development and dissemination of environmentally responsive technologies. Number 10, fight corruption in all of its forms, including extortion and bribery. So these are wonderful ideologies, these are wonderful mission statements, but they have no way to achieve them except by bringing down the United States. They have to make us participate in this global achievement, otherwise they are not going to reach their sustainable goals. Now you can see why they've got so much invested, trillions of dollars. They have to force our compliance, i.e. they release a virus to force us to cooperate on a global problem. Now you wonder why the Boy Scouts have been destroyed. Look at the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts are sold on the Sustainable Development Goals. They're now trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The Boy Scouts are now run by the United Nations. Now remember, folks, we started out with the rider on the white horse with no arrows in his quiver, and he conquers without means of war. So they're conquering the world without war. And they're conquering through these SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that were developed by the Terramar Project, and Palau, the ambassador who brought this initiative to the UN, Ghislaine has talked to the UN 12 times. And so this is what they've been doing. This is what they've been up to, folks, is they've all come together and they've signed this global compact, UN Global Compact Breakthrough Innovation of SDGs action platforms, bring together businesses, technologists, thought leaders, UN agencies, entrepreneurs, and policymakers to inspire new approaches to corporate sustainability, leveraging new business models and disruptive technologies such as circular economy models, artificial intelligence, and big data. Folks, our corporations made a collective decision to sell out America based on the global profitability that they would make based upon their signatures on this UN Global Compact. They were selling America out. And so no wonder so many CEOs have resigned, because they know that they are part and parcel to sedition and treason. They sold this nation out, folks. And they did it knowingly. The World Bank is involved. There's the global roundtable on blockchains, because has anybody seen the ads recently they've gone into a store and they said, because of a shortage of coinage in the world, we're now going to have you pay by card if necessary. That is not the truth. It is a lie. And the reason it is because they're going to institute global blockchains, which is one of the sustainable development goals. Here it is in Arlington, Virginia, where I was born. We've got FinTech. FinTech is code for the Fed. Okay, so we've now got FinTech involved in InnoSpring. Remember I told you about InnoSpring? InnoSpring, right? Selling our NSF, creating DARPAs all over the world, in China and Russia and Ukraine. They have all come together to reach these SDGs, and one of those is to set in motion a global blockchain. That's one of the strategic development goals. So they're going to do away with our cash, folks. And this was 2017 when they had their global meeting or roundtable on blockchains. They had it right in Arlington, across the river from POTUS. They're going to institute the blockchains. They did it right in his face. They had a meeting where they're going to institute a global blockchain and do away with our money. Look at all the people that are participating. All these global companies. KPMG, FinTech, that's the Fed. You know, we're dealing with people are operating outside of our government. Okay, now here's when it gets a little technical, because now who would have to wear a mask at all times? People who lived underwater, right? They're going to build underwater cities, and they've already got plans for it, and underwater farming, and they're going to move cities underwater. So there'll be people underwater living in underwater cities. That is part of this Agenda 2030. And the Japanese have already come up with several ideas for cities, whether, you know, balls or on the floor or whatever, floating cities. And you can see some of these options here. Folks, they're preparing us for a transformation that we can't even imagine. Here's China's already, they're setting up a city. They're just doing floating cities where you fill in an area with land, and you just do a floating city. Man-made islands, submerged cities, smart cities in the water, Japan. They submerge bubbles. So there's many things that they've got planned that they're not telling us about, and they've already got. And there's a sneak peek at ocean colonies. Now, where did this come from? Folks, we need to look at this biblically. We need to understand that these people are getting information from the ascended masters. They're getting information from the fallout. They're getting information from Atlantis, because that's what the angels Atlantis was a super advanced colony that supposedly sunk, right? Well, what if Antarctica is Atlantis? What if they found some of this ancient material, and that's why they don't want us looking at Antarctica, because they found Atlantis. When Atlantis broke away, it didn't submerge, it just went to the southern pole and froze. So, we need to understand that this is all biblical, and it's hard to comprehend, but these folks are believing it and they're buying into it, and they're going to. This is where they're taking us. This is where the NWO wants to go. This is their ideology. It's humans living underneath the water, living in floating cities, because they will own the entire globe, and so they can make a city wherever they want. And they're going to start it. They've already started French Polynesia. There's going to be an underwater terraformed city in French Polynesia. So no wonder these folks are in the islands. They're in the islands because in the Caribbean as well, they're looking at setting up countries. They're going to set up their own countries. And you can imagine these 100 billionaires, who's going to own the countries? That's why you got Gates falling over himself, eugenicist that he is, and greedy person that he is. He's going to own countries. They're going to own these countries, folks. They're going to be able to personally invest in owning the ocean. Can you see them salivating? What is a blockchain? Okay, what does it mean to have a blockchain? You can see the growth of a blockchain throughout history. It's basically a digital finance space, folks, that incorporates bitcoins, incorporates transactions in a digital space. Okay. Now to a little bit of local stuff. If you start looking into these governors who are fighting against Trump, every single one of them is signed on to this 2030 agenda. Every single one. So they have another master. They are not listening to the president. This is not our president. We want an emperor. And so you got the Chicago global goals, achieving the SDGs through collective local action. So this is Chicago, folks. September of 2019, that's less than a year ago. The United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity, for peace on the planet. They are not listening to our president because they are following a UN global sustainable development project into which they've invested, and their greedy billionaire hands are now all invested. And let's remember that J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, his cousin, Tom Pritzker, was on Lolita Express. These folks are all involved with this. They're all involved. And Peggy Pritzker is on the board at Microsoft with Gates, and she's on the board of Aspen think tank. So we need to understand that all these folks are involved. And you look at AbbVie, the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, the Pritzker Foundation, the supporting grants from Grant Thornton, Kirkland and Ellis, United and patron sponsors, Brinks and Hyatt's Hotels Foundation, and Uber and Mensch. It's a supreme race, folks. Uber. Why do they call it Uber? And this report was informed by a private workshop called the SDGs and Cities, held at June 6th at the 2019 Pritzker Forum on Global Cities. So the Pritzkers, the billionaire family, had their own global forum on global cities, hosted in partnership with all these folks right there in Chicago. You think they're going to listen to our president And the workshop was conducted under Chatham House rules. What's Chatham House? That's Rhodes Roundtable. Those the ones that gave Hillary Clinton and Dominique Asquith the award for taking down Benghazi. Okay, so we need to see all these folks are involved. The World Economic Forum, that's WEF, you know, all these folks are involved from the outset. So we've got the whole world fighting against us. Even our own people, our own governors, trying to stop us from stopping them from this global 2030 agenda. Global goals, global cities achieving SD through local action. This is all Chicago. They're signed on to the global compact. They're going to fight Trump 100%. Here's Gavin Newsom, same deal. Gavin Newsom is signed on the 2030 agenda, right? Cal Green. It's called Cal Green's board permanently implements the sustainable goals in all governance. In LA, it's all, that's why they're fighting Trump, because they have signed on to the global compact there. The reason why he sent $1 billion over to China was not because he was buying masks, it's because this global compact. Look at the California Green Academy is the same exact SDGs that are in the 2030 Sustainable 2030 Agenda. Same exact. Governor Whitmer, same deal. So now you can see why these governors are fighting Trump. And it gets even worse, folks, because here is a Japanese firm coming over and measuring SDGs. And they're coming over to the United States and they're holding a conference, Japanese Business Federation of Washington, D.C., Kaidenren, USA. Well, look at all the governors that they met with there. Tim Walz of Minnesota, Lori Kelly of Kansas, Larry Hogan of Maryland, Doug Ducey, who's one of the Republican governors who won't lift the mask thing. Ducey, right? Kristen Noem of South Dakota, Bill Lee of Tennessee, Gretchen Whitmer, there she is. She's all involved in this 2030 objectives, folks, the Agenda 2030. Well, we're really going to have to take a look at ourselves because everybody around the world is involved in this, including the Pope. The Pope. Pope Francis stumps for UN Sustainable Development Goals. Remember Fauci? Remember the Ignatians? Pope Francis urged Catholics to support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is March of 2019. So last year. Why is the Pope involved in trying to forward UN's goals if it doesn't have to do with an NWO? The Pope is in on the NWO because the Pope has been part of this cabal since the outset. Kathy Calvin. This is Kathy Calvin, who's the leader of the Sustainable Development. She's the CEO of UN Foundation. She explained how the next 10 years are defined as a decade to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. She's saying, look, folks, we're supposed to be delivering these goals, not talking about them. And so she gives a speech for a minute. I'm not going to play it, but you can see that it's United Nations Foundation. It's all these groups. They're all involved in selling out our country because they have to meet their Agenda 2030 objectives because they've all signed on to it. Now to why they really need the United States, because they want to siphon off our money to pay for all of this because they need $3 trillion a year. And so we are not helping them. We are not cooperating. So they're going to force us. Virus is forcing us to meet their Agenda 2030 goals. The virus is Bill Gates' method of meeting his strategic development goals for inoculation for vaccine by forcing us to have a virus that they've already developed the vaccine for, and they just delay it. And folks, they're eugenicists. Who put up the Georgia Guidestones? They want to decrease the population. I don't care what the UN says. Involved in all of these plans are to look at children as assets, look at humans as assets, look at all of our oceans as assets, look at the wealth that they can personally bring from doing the same things to the oceans that they were doing above. They've been liars since the outset, and they just continue to lie. Now, this presentation has addressed what I said it was going to address. It gave you the biblical understanding of what's occurring. It gave you an understanding of why Ghislaine Maxwell has never been arrested. It gave you an understanding of why the Clintons have always been able to escape arrest, because they are part of the NWO, and the NWO protects the NWO, and they are all about achieving their global agenda by 2030. And any of us who are not on board with that are enemies, and we have to go. So you develop a virus that doesn't kill kids, it just kills people who are older, because we're the only ones that are fighting them. The kids aren't fighting them. They're sold out on this global NWO agenda, this communistic ideal that somehow everything will be utopia. And so the corporations are involved, the universities are involved, the politicians are involved, and they've all sold out to the UN. And the UN is being run by the cabal of the banks, the Rosicrucians, the Holy Roman Empire, and the continuance of the Roman Empire, because that is the throne upon which the Antichrist is going to sit. It's the truth of the matter, folks, and it's honest, it's straightforward, and I believe I've given you sufficient evidence to make some decisions. Now, you make your own decisions from this, but that's the information I've provided, and I believe it's cogent, and it's you determine whether it's substantive enough for you to make those discernments. But I do thank you for spending time with me tonight. I do appreciate your time as always, and this is really important material, and the Lord gave it to me, and so I want to give it to you. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to spend time with you. I'm going to stop this recording now, and I will put it up on my YouTube site here pretty soon, Disambiguation, and I will put the link in Twitter, and I probably will play it or reenact it this weekend for the show. Hope you folks are well. I wish you a wonderful night, and I appreciate your time.